Let me ask you, have you been working on a children's book, but you have questions like how long should your picture book be? What's the proper audience for a picture book? What should you put in your query letter? What are comp books? These are super common questions, and these are the exact type of questions that I just answered during our latest live Q&A. So let's take a look behind the scenes and get those answers for you. Hey there, and welcome back. So, today I have a very special episode for you where I'm going to take you behind the scenes to one of our live sessions here at Kidlit Academy. So, we host these types of events twice a month for our students to get direct answers to their writing and their publishing questions. So, we're going to be talking about how much back matter should you include in your book? What types of back matter should you include? What even is back matter? How long should your picture book be? Should you write in rhyme? The editing process. How old should your picture book reader be? What's the proper age range? We're going to be talking about querying and agents and what to put in your query letter and what's going to make your story marketable. All these questions and more are covered. Check out the timestamps below in the description if you want to see the answer to a specific question. Otherwise, watch the whole session so you can get the most value out of today's episode and take it back to your own children's book and implement what you learn. Let's dive in.
Yeah, so in writing the query letters, I struggle with those ones. Either sometimes it's a lot of times it's agents that ask for it, but even sometimes just querying a publishing house, they'll ask for it. But a lot of times they want three comp titles, which I can go and kind of get the gist of which ones maybe I'd pick, but then they want to know, how would your book compare? How would your book stand out, to make it different? So I struggle a little bit with really what kind of information to put in there and how to address that question.
So there's kind of like two ways to comp books, but I want you to think of it from a marketability standpoint. So your whole point of your query is a sales letter. And I think I struggled with this when I first started because it feels like there's so much pressure on you as a writer, like, am I writing this correctly? Am I doing this right? And you really have to have like a lot of confidence in your story and like in your query. So when you're thinking about these comps, you have to be thinking, what's going to make it look like my book is super marketable and saleable? And that's what you're looking for. So there's two different kinds of comp books that you can use. When they're asking specifically for comp books, it's a separate kind, but I'm going to talk about the first one. So one of the kinds is it's like I don't know if you've ever heard of Kathy. She teaches how to Twitter pitch. She calls them a sticky mashup, but it's essentially like it's putting a picture into someone's mind. So a good example would be The Selection. It's a YA series, and a kind of a pitch for that with using comp books would be it's like The Hunger Games meets The Bachelor. So if you have
Mm.
older books that can clearly paint a picture, it's okay to use them as part of your query, but they wouldn't be considered comp books because we need to know based on what's selling now, how well will your book sell? And the reason that a lot of agents and publishers and things want those comp books to be recent, like within the last 3 years, is because they're looking for that sales data. We had someone come and was actually, I think it was Adria Getz when she was here a couple years ago, and she's going to be back here in November. She was talking about how you don't want to use like the big name books because if you are a first time author, you're kind of more considered mid list, which means that they're not expecting your book to be millions and millions of copies. So that's why you don't want to use big books to be like, yeah, my book's going to sell equally the same. So that's where it kind of gets challenging, right? It's like, okay, well, I don't want to say my book's like Harry Potter, but it's magical realism. It's used, so how can I find something more recent? There is a course that most of you guys should have access to, I believe. It's called Kidlit Idea Creator or Idea Generator. I changed the title a little bit to make it a little bit clearer, but it teaches you step by step how to do comp book research. So if you go into your course
Okay.
portal, you should be able to find it. And then I tell you what to look for when you're looking for them. But for those comp books, you want to look for anything within the last 3 to 5 years. that makes the most sense for your book. So like Mary Beth, what's your book about?
So the one I'm trying to write the query for now, I actually sent in and got a critique from you, and
Yeah.
yeah, and it was a 3, that it was ready to go. So that's why I'm really like working on the query. Um, but it has like a rhyming verse, kind of like a Dr. Seuss kind of
Okay.
thing, but it's about that it's okay to like different things, and it's okay if we don't all like the same things, and it's okay for boys to like flowers and girls to like football. It's like that kind of vibe. So from it sounds like what you're saying is I could say something in the query letter about it has a flow like a Dr. Seuss rhyme, but I wouldn't use a Dr. Seuss book as a comp, right?
Right.
Right?
And
Okay.
if it's
Yeah.
too close in cadence to Dr. Seuss, I almost
Yeah.
wouldn't mention that just because you don't
Right.
want them to compare your rhyme to
Right.
him. But what I would do is when you're looking for comp books, I would look for both rhyming picture books, like recently
Okay.
published rhyming picture books or best-selling or top-selling recent picture books with rhyme. I would search that. And then I would also search books on acceptance or books on
Okay.
kind of like agreeableness,
Yeah.
something in your main theme.
Okay.
So if the main theme books don't rhyme, that's okay because you're saying like there's a market for it, and here's like
Right.
2 examples of something that's really good. But then you're also going to say like, but and kind of when you pick a rhyme, you want to get a similar style of rhyme.
Hmm.
So if yours is more like a sweet rhyme, maybe someone like a Patsy Lowe Miller would be a good example. But if yours
Right.
is more like humorous rhyme, maybe someone like Josh Funk would be a really good example.
Okay.
They're
Yeah.
both rhyming picture book authors, but their books are in completely different
Right.
sections. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That
yours
helps.
can,
Yeah.
oh, wonderful. Yeah. So you guys
Yeah.
always be thinking about where would your book be shelved,
Yeah.
and how would you sell it? So the whole point is it's a sales letter, and it gets easier. So yeah, but yeah, there's I dive into it. Idea Creator, Kidlit Idea Creator is the course.
Okay, so I have listened to the BBC Maestro of Julia Donaldson.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And Julia Donaldson is speaking with her agent, her longtime agent. And one of the things that the agent was saying is that, don't be frightened to go out there and have a fresh idea.
Yeah.
And then, she says to do so, you may have to break the rules a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
then Julia Donaldson states that she is a rule breaker, but you kind of got to know the rules before you break them.
100%.
Right. So I've also listened to Carol Ann Duffy, which pretty much says pretty much the same thing. You
Yeah,
kind of got to know the rules before you break them. Same
exactly.
thing with David Williams, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, and then also with reading a lot, I've also seen it written plenty of times.
Yeah.
So I guess it's more of a two-part question.
Okay.
Because there is, or it seems to be, 168 poetic forms.
Okay.
So I'm thinking that the rules was broken at least 167 times.
Okay.
Now, now I do know that it seems like, or it has been stated before that words pretty much take real estate on the page. So your words have to count. Okay. So, but it seems like a lot of the words that are taken out are more like conjunction words. And for me, there are a lot of those words that can make the rhythm smoother. So basically, it seems like if you have certain words in there, like
Mm-hmm.
just and they call them like filler words.
Yeah, filler words. Yeah, we chat about that.
Right. But there are times when those filler words can make the rhyme smoother.
Yes.
So why is it
So,
like, why
oh,
are people
so you're
against it?
asking like an editing question. Yes. So words like so, that, just, etc. are filler words and they shouldn't be technically used in sentences because they just take up space. And when you are a picture book author, especially, you really want to be very mindful of your words because we only have 300 to 500 words to really tell this story. You want to have a complete arc. And I like that you're saying, you know, rules can be broken, but you have to know the rules. So that's why we teach you the rules, and then you can bend them for what makes the most sense for you. If you're going to be doing poetry and you're going to be doing rhyme, and you really want to make sure that you stick to the meter, and you're breaking some of those editing rules, sometimes what I would counter with is that a forced rhyme? Are you trying to force this to work for your story? Is that the best way to phrase the sentence? Sometimes if it's, you know, in dialogue, or if you're using it in a way, this is the way the narrator talks and it flows correctly, then it's fine. That's like where you can bend the rules. But most of the time when we're reading manuscripts that are in rhyme, or if they feel forced and they feel like they're trying super hard to get this to work. And that's just when you need to be, you know, doing a little bit more massage. And that's why rhyme is actually one of the hardest ones to write for, because you're so restricted based off of the stresses, the number of beats. I just had a submission on the publishing house side, you know, for BiblioKid, where they're a songwriter and they wrote in rhyme, and it doesn't actually work when it's in story, because the rhymes are not actual rhymes when you would read them. And we've had a lot on the Journey to Kidlit side when we're doing edits or we're doing critiques that we've had to rework too. So if you guys are doing rhyme, I would really make sure that you follow all the rules to make sure you have a complete story, in the sense of you have a, you know, complete character, you know who the target reader is, you know exactly what the story goal and the focus is, and then you have that structure, that outline. And then you have to go through and then make sure that what is being said fits the story. Everything should be natural. It should feel like it's part of it. Like Julia Donaldson's a great example. The Gruffalo is amazing. Also, Josh Funk is a great one too to look at, because they're telling you a complete story while still using it in rhyme. Sometimes when I read manuscripts, they're definitely like, where did this come in? Like, you're talking about a soccer game, and all of a sudden their nose was smelling a rose, and I'm like, where did this rose come in? That's a forced rhyme, you know. So you really want to make sure, no matter if this is in prose or if this is in rhyme, that the reactions make sense for your characters, that it's flowing organically and naturally, and that you're not forcing anything. So you can definitely break it. I'm actually Picture Book Perfection. My book comes out in January, and we talk about when it's okay to make exceptions to the rules and when it's not. So it's like a new section that we haven't really chatted about. But whenever you want to make an exception, you have to go and find it in existence and explain why does that exception work, and how does that apply to you. So that's like always a good rule of thumb whenever we're trying to break something.
Thank you so much, Brooke. I really do appreciate that.
You bet. Who else has a question? Kelly wants to know, is it possible to write a picture book for 4th to 5th graders if the subject is bullying, being true to yourself? Everything she researched says no. Okay. This is a great question because it comes down to our reader audience, right? When we talk about for picture books, most of the time, picture books are written for ages 4 to 7, sometimes 5 to 8, sometimes 3 to 6. Just understanding that. So I would say, no, Kelly, you shouldn't write it for 4th to 5th graders, because a 4th and a 5th grader is not going to a bookstore to ask their mom to buy them a picture book. They're going to purchase middle grade books most of the time, because they're 11 to 12. And some of them, if they're really advanced readers, are even reading early YA or even more advanced than that. But a picture book can be used in like a classroom setting by 4th and 5th grade teachers or counselors or something when it becomes bullying. But there's tons and tons of picture books that are about bullying, being true to yourself, that can be written for, and they're written for, you know, the standard picture book audience. So I would go and first read a bunch of picture books that are about bullying and being true to yourself, to kind of see what already exists out there, to know how does your idea differ. You know, you want to make sure that you have a fresh take on it, a fresh perspective, a fresh character, or fresh something. There has to be some void in the market that's going to make it marketable and saleable. And then you create it just like you would any other picture book. So you don't have to dumb it down because you're trying to write it for 5-year-olds. I mean, picture books are not dumbed down. They're really written very well, and and they can be, that's why they can be they can be taught, they can be used to teach. at fourth to like eighth grade levels because they're really well written. So if you're trying to write for like an older kid because you're feeling like you're having to dumb down your content, you're probably just approaching it wrong. So I would just go and read a bunch, figure out where your idea kind of fits in, how it stands apart from what already exists, and then work on creating a true picture book, going through all the steps we teach about making sure you have like a solid point of view, character, have a strong story goal or focus. It's not just about bullying, but what specifically in terms of the external goal, and being true to yourself, and then format your plot outline based off of which one makes the most sense, etc. Who else has a question? Mary Ann.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering, when you do a picture book proposal for a traditional publisher, and you're going to have back matter, you're going to have notes that's about a historical or a social issue. Do you include those when you send in your manuscript, or you just indicate that there will be back matter? Like, does that have to be written before you send the proposal?
Is it a fiction or a nonfiction?
It's a narrative fiction, but set a more informational narrative, but it is fiction.
Yeah. So you're doing a query. So the story is at least written.
Yes, and I have an invitation to send the proposal. I just wasn't sure whether I needed to write the back matter and include that or just the
Most of
manuscript.
the time you can just say back matter upon request.
Okay.
Because it really depends on kind of the pagination and the publisher and like, what's going to make the most sense for the book. And what we always talk about is sometimes back matter makes more sense for an author website versus actually in the book. But having ideas for back matter is great. And a publisher is going to love that. So just say additional back matter available upon request. Jacinda.
I have a quick question. If you had already written your manuscript and then stumbled upon your beautiful outline of how to write a story, would you go back and put it all in the pieces and see if it fits the outline?
You're more just going to have to go through the editing process. And so you're probably going to have to start, with the developmental edit. So that's big picture stuff. Where are your holes? Where are you missing things? And then sometimes you make a copy and you delete and you just rewrite, but you save the other one and then maybe you're copy and pasting in. Sometimes it's just like tiny tweaks when it comes to specific lines when you're editing. So it just sort of depends. Step 3 in the course portal, editing your picture book or editing your children's book, has all of the different breakdowns of the different types of edits, as well as examples of showing you how to edit. Have you already kind of compared your old manuscript versus kind of like what should be in a manuscript to see where your holes are?
Not yet.
Yeah, that's where I would start. I would, a good, quick, easy way is just how can you pitch it? Can you do it in one sentence? My main character is my story is about who must do X in order to get blank. That's just like a standard pitch formula. If you can fill in those, you probably have like at least your plot down. And so then it might be more like small tweaking. If you can't fill it, then you're missing major holes. Yeah.
I mean, would you recommend starting with like the critique that you guys offer? Would that
Yeah,
be a good place
definitely.
to start?
I always think a critique is the best place to start once you have a manuscript. Never to start with edits, always to start with a critique because you want to get big picture feedback first and see how close is it. And that's why with our critiques, we do levels. So if you get a level 1, it means there's big picture issues, developmental issues that need to be addressed. Get a level 2, it's more line edit, finessing some of those. If you get a level 3, it means maybe we have a couple suggestions, but for the most part, it's ready to go. So it's on a scale to help you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. What is back matter, Jessica? Good question. So back matter can kind of be anything. And honestly, if you have an idea, so like in Kelly's case where she's wanting to write a book about bullying or being true to yourself, something like that can be really well served in back matter. Because a lot of the times when we're new, especially, we always come up with ideas that are kind of more message based because there's something that we wanted to write about. Either, we experienced it in our own life, we were looking for something to help with our kids, or something we just have this like value takeaway. Like when I first started, I wanted to write a book about body issues. I also had a series on anti-bullying, but those aren't strong enough stories. So you still have to, go through all the steps, create a book that has, a character and a story goal, and it has this whole story. But then you'll include these things called back matter at the end. And that's where if your story gets too message driven, it's better to pull it, put some of that stuff in back matter, and then tell a really great story. So back matter can be, critical thinking questions, discussion questions to ask
Okay.
about the book.
Okay. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, activities. And that's why sometimes certain back matter is better on a website than it is in the book, because, like additional resources or links or things like that,
Right.
go put that in a website, and then there's maybe an opt-in. Or if it's directly tied to the book, it's better in the book.
Right.
So,
Okay. As I'm a homeschool mom, so I have a lot of books. And so I've seen both ways where they give you a link in the back to say like, oh, these are additional resources or additional worksheets or whatever you want to do with your kid. And then there's ones that give you specific questions, which is usually a lot less and simpler.
yes, exactly. Because
Okay.
you only have so much space.
Right.
And that's why it also becomes publisher specific, because it's how it paginates.
Okay.
How much room do we have? Yeah. And like going back to Mary Ann's question, you guys could always brainstorm a bunch of different ideas for back matter. And then if a publisher asks, what kind of, have you been thinking about back matter? You can be like, yeah, I have these questions, or I have these links to resources, or, or I have this activity that would be fun. But if it's too much, then it goes, website.
I have another question. I just can't get my hand up now. I'm
No,
sorry.
you're fine.
I couldn't get mine
So,
down.
I know for children's book, 500 words are the sweet spot.
Yes.
But if you had to push it to the limit,
Mhm.
is it like 800 words or less? Or is it like, oh, now you're too far?
So there isn't like a set number of words. Jory John's book, The Bad Seed, is I think 850 words. But then there's certain books that are only, like I think one of my books is only like 236 words. It really comes down to, do you have a complete story? Do you have proper pacing? And how is this going to paginate? And when we say paginate, especially if you guys are newer to children's books and you're not as familiar with some of the words, pagination just means how is the text going to lay out once we start putting illustrations in. Typically, picture books are 32 pages. Sometimes then we'll go up in eighths, so sometimes 40 or 48. And the only reason why it's in eighths is because that's how it's printed. They do it in print runs of pages of 8. So when you have a book, if it's way too long, there's actually an advanced lesson in section 3. It's called Making Your Words Count, not just counting your words, in the course portal. So go under section 3, advanced editing tips, making your words count. There's a video on it. But most of the time, if I read a manuscript and it's too long, like let's say it's 1,000 words, it more than likely has too many ideas. Most of the time it's got 2 ideas. It's almost like you started talking about one thing and then halfway through the book, you have a completely new idea. And that just means that, going back to what Jacinda was saying with, you need to go back to the beginning and think about, do I have all of the information? Do I know exactly what my external goal is? Because if that's not clear and if that's not being threaded through, that's when we start throwing in extra stuff. Or sometimes we put in things because there's things we want to mention, there's things we want to talk about, but they don't tie directly into the story goal or focus. And they're just distractions, and they're holding the story back, and they're just filling this. And those are like the 2 biggest reasons that your book is going to be more than 1,000 words. And in both of those situations, you need to cut it down. And then if your book is, let's say, 650 words, maybe it's 800 words, have you been as tight as possible with your words? You could say the dog went across the street and then he did this, or you could simplify it even more and be like, the dog jumped or something. Using strong action verbs can help kind of shorten those and sharpen them. Using sound effects, using onomatopoeia, things like that can really help tighten a word, it can also increase engagement and reader enjoyment because you're kind of creating that interaction with them a little bit more. I think this lesson should be on there because I taught an editing workshop in May, and I'm pretty sure we uploaded it as a bonus in the Kidlit writing course. But there's the 4 easy ways to quickly edit a manuscript. And one of the big ways is the ly and ing. Those are very big signs of telling or passive sentences. And a lot of the times I'll see those, and that's how you can quickly make a sentence shorter. So if you have, was running, ran. So you went from 2 really long words to 1 3-letter word. So, just ways that you can shorten it. So to answer your question, there's no max. It's just, do you have a complete story? Have you followed all the rules? Does it make sense? And is it well paced? And then I actually got a critique once from James McGowan a few years ago, where I have a story, it's 330 words. And I like to tell this story because it's 330 words, and James McGowan says to me, I think your picture book is too long. Have you paginated it? And at the time I was like, no, I didn't paginate it. I just submitted it to you because I was in a hurry, as we all are when we're trying to take advantage of an above the slush pile kind of submission. And I did, after our critique, I went through and I paginated it, and it ended up being like 54 pages long when I started to think about how would this fall in the text. Now, this is kind of advanced because as someone who reads submissions all the time, I see a lot of authors that are just like double page spread, double page spread, double page spread, double page spread. And that's not actually how books are paginated. So you kind of have to know, your writing skills have to be a little bit farther developed. And that's why I'm always like, be typing out manuscripts, be looking at manuscripts, be checking like how did those picture books look? And then if there's, let's say you grab 10 picture books, type them out. I always check how many words was in this picture book. That's how I know how many words are in the bad seed, because I typed it out and then I checked how many words are in this. But the reason you do it and you do it so much is because it's increasing your skills. It's teaching you, how did this New York Times bestselling author write this book? And it teaches you like how you would look at it, sentence structure, voice, shortening. But yeah, so it's a 330 word, to get to my point, 330 words, but it paginated out to 54 pages, and that is way too long. So even though I really didn't have that many words, I still needed to cut my story down because the number of scenes was too many. So, there is no right answer when it comes to the number of words. It's just ideally less than 600, but sometimes they can be short, sometimes they can be longer. It's just making sure you have a clear story focus, a clear story told in the fastest, most interesting and enjoyable way possible. Irene, you've written a story about an 8 to 9-year-old girl who wants to successfully dive off a diving board at her lake. It's 1,000 words. Yes. Well, I think it's in 2 categories. So you either haven't fully developed a chapter book, or you need to rework it to be a picture book.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's nothing in between.
Mm-mm.
No. I thought I bet there was another category right after picture book.
There's an early reader, and I purposefully do not teach about that because it's abused and ruined so much, especially because self-publishing is so easy to do. Because technically early readers are 1,200, 2,500 words. So a lot of the times authors write a book, and it's 1,200 words, but it's really just, it's not really that well written, and they'll just call it an early reader, pump it out, put it on Amazon, and then wonder why it doesn't sell more than 10 copies. And it's because it's not complete, and you need to go and rework it. And so in your situation, if it's 1,000 words, it's got a topic, dive off the diving board. That would be a really good picture book. And there's probably some examples, like I can think of, I think, is it Jessica? She has a book about like being fearful of water. So like things like those would be good comp books for picture books, like learning to swim or kind of overcoming your fear of water would be good ones to look at. It's probably a picture book for ages, kindergarten to 2nd grade, 5 to 8.
Yeah.
But you probably can cut that down out. if I were, without even looking at it, I can guess at least 250, if not 300 words.
Yeah.
Can easily come off that.
I just
And
age level of the character.
I mean, I'm age or dumb, should be
Okay.
7.
7. Okay.
Yeah. But it
7
bigger
years.
7.
Okay.
Yeah. And in a picture book, you don't necessarily say how old they are. It's not like in a chapter book or a novel,
Right.
because you don't have to be as descriptive. But in your mind, if you're just picturing like, it's the summer before 2nd grade, she's 7 years old. But there's a lot of kids, they know how to swim in kindergarten, 1st grade. So it could be,
Okay.
it's the summer before 1st grade. It could be a 6th grader. But if you kind of have like that picture in your mind of this about 7-year-old getting to jump off the diving board, and then just look at your sentences, because I would imagine that your sentences are too long and you could cut.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we don't talk about early readers because it's a musical category. A true
All right.
early reader has like all of these rules behind it. Like it has to have very specific word choice, because it's when kids are learning to read for the first time. So they have very specific sight words that they have to be able to read. And when you're shelving an early reader, it has to be like leveled. It's called leveling in schools. If you've ever heard of like the AR, I think is what it's called, the advanced accelerated reading program. And then they say like, this is a 1.2 and this is like a 1.4 or something. It's because they're leveled. So based off of your age and your reading level, you should be able to read this book. And when you're writing an early reader and really wrote it incorrectly, it can't be shelved that way. It's probably more like a 4th grade reading level. But it's only 1,000 words. And so, so that's why we don't talk about it. Also really hard to sell a true early reader to publishers, because they do them a lot in-house. They're very expensive to make, because like picture books, they have to hire an illustrator to illustrate an entire book, but they're slightly longer. So it's more pages, and it's so restricted on the language choice and how you tell the story. So they most of the time just hire those. They do work for hire contracts. So yeah, if anyone has a book that's 1,200 words that they're trying to make an early reader, go watch all of my lessons.
I have one more
Yeah.
if nobody else does, because I know I already asked you a question.
Okay.
But back to like query letters, would you put in if you felt your book would fit under like an SEL category, like
Definitely.
the social emotional, you put something in saying this would be a great
Yeah.
something. Do you think it's important to, because they talk about the 4 categories, I guess. Would you actually go that far that you'd say it would address this category? Something like that?
So with your query letter, your job is to make this the most marketable and sellable thing. So you're saying like, my book is so great, it's going to sell, like that's your job. So anything you can put in there that kind of says, it takes some of the work off of like an agent or a publisher of how they would pitch it to their marketing team. And SEL is huge right now. Everyone wants SEL. So if you can tuck that in somewhere, towards the end of your query, because you want to pitch them on the idea and then say like, this is an SEL driven picture book. It teaches, this. It's really good. And if you guys were here for Pat's talk,
that's what made me think of it. It was listening to her, but okay.
Yeah, definitely. Good question. And as a reminder too, because you guys are working on queries, we can critique query letters so long as you got a 2 or a 3 on your first critique.
Oh.
If you want someone to look at your critique, you can also do it for peer critiques too. The thing we do in the Facebook group, you can, say, I have a query letter, if someone wants to look at it. Cheryl, do you have any advice for a book that doesn't have a problem or conflict as main focus? Yes, find one. Cheryl, give us a little bit more information about the type of book you're trying to write, and we can help you. Because you have to have an external goal. If you don't have a purpose for the story, if you don't have a so what factor, why does the reader care? How do you sell it? That's why we talk about being able to quickly pitch your book. It helps you know if you have all the components. And someone like Patsy Miller, she writes a lot of message-driven books from the surface, but when you think about it she has all of the things that we teach that you have to include. That's why we had her come and talk about how to do SEL kind of books in July, because it's something that we always come up with as writers. We always have that like internal, that value, that takeaway, but how do we then turn it into a story? And you also want to always be thinking about your characters, your moment in time. You know, your characters had a life before your book, and they're going to have a life after your book. This is just a peek into a window of time, and why this character, why this specific moment, why now? That's your reason to care. That's your story goal. That's your focus. And if you don't have that, you don't have a story. Yes. So you guys tell us what your idea is, Cheryl, and we can help brainstorm. Yeah, 4 minutes.
Well, okay, I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. My thought was, it's about a little boy who loves to play in his treehouse. And so he watches and observes things from his treehouse, and then he uses his imagination. For example, one of my thoughts was, you know, on maybe the ledge of his treehouse, there are ants walking by in a line like we all see, and he imagines where they're going.
Yeah.
And so, and then another picture may be, you know, they're headed towards the picnic. And then another picture might be of the ants, you know, holding a hot dog or watermelon as they're marching along, that they've, you know, gone. And maybe the ant at the front of lines holding a drumstick, and he's like a drumstick major type thing.
Yeah.
Maybe one's banging on a drum, and, you know, just imagining where these ants are going.
Yeah.
And what they might be doing. And then something else he might see from his treehouse, and what's going on.
Yeah. So this is a classic of maybe you have the wrong perspective. Maybe you have the wrong point of view for your character. Because that's a fun idea, but it's not the boy's story. And the reason it's not really the boy's story is because he's not an active participant. He's just watching things happen. And in a story, you never want your character to just have things happen to them. They need to always be in movement. So you could write a second point of view story, you know, where the reader is kind of the main character, but it's the focus, the perspective that we're going to be focusing on is the ants. And your title could be like, where do the ants go? And the goal is, well, we're going to figure out where the ants go. And so you could pretend like the reader is sitting in there, because we meet the reader, we meet the main character in the treehouse, and oh, there's an ant. I wonder where they go. And it's a list plot of every single thing that you observe, and you can, you know, get as creative and fun about it. But at the end, what happens? And so, you know, where did they go? You have to have like somewhere where they're going to end up eventually. If that's, you know, they're taking like food specifically to their ant home, and you're doing an educational kind of book while still being fun. Go back to that back matter of, you know, how do ants live? How do they feed themselves? About their things. So you could have some takeaways for it. Or, you know, maybe he's going to follow them and it's going to lead to a picnic and the ants are having a party. But if you go to the first idea, you kind of have a little bit more marketability, saleability in terms of like school, because you have some of those takeaways, plus you have the education and the learning. But does that make sense about how sometimes not necessarily our first choice for point of view or perspective is always the correct one?
Yeah. So would you keep the focus to like ants, just ants, or other things that he sees? Or
Well, I would kill the boy. And I would write this from the second point of view. And I would say, oh, look, there's some ants here. Where do they go? Let's follow them and find out. And now it's an interactive book where the reader is, you know, the main character, because the reader is following, just like you would with the boy, but you're making it more engaging. You're making that main character now have a purpose. Where if the boy is just watching, so what? What do we care? And where's this going? You know, because you need to have something that's measurable and trackable, so that way we know. And if we set it up with, okay, well, it's this boy, well, then he's not really doing anything. So if you really want it to be about the boy, why is he like an investigative kind of kid, and his whole goal is to study ants and to figure out how they get there. But it's a picture book, and the less characters and the simpler you can make your idea and your plot, the more engaging, the more fun, the quicker your pace, and you don't have as many words. So
Yeah, I did think of him as an investigator. Like I could imagine him maybe with some binoculars around his neck, a magnifying glass, so he's ready to explore what
yeah.
he sees from his treehouse.
Yeah, I still would make it a second point of view even with him, because he doesn't necessarily need to have a name. He doesn't necessarily, but if you really wanted to make about this, you have to develop him fully. Who is this kid? He's 6 years old. What does he want? What's his goal behind being an investigative kid? And what's he looking for? So you want to be able to set it up. If he is this kid and he is investigative, because we just had Shannon Anderson, her book, I Love Strawberries, probably pretty similar to that idea. So this book, I don't know, do you have a name for the boy?
I was just thinking about High in a Treetop.
His name is what? Ian?
No, the name
Oh.
of the book, my High in a Treetop, where he sees these things from.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but make him active. So he has to be like following them. He has to be like choosing to do things. Like he needs to be in movement. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. And then read some comp books about that, because there's like, Ada Twist Scientist. Things like, even though that one's kind of based on a person, they'll teach you about investigative kind of curious kids, the most magnificent thing, and how they get them moving. Those would be good like mentor texts to take a look at too. And also go and look at some like how-to books or some kind of list plots and see like which one might make the most sense based off of what you're wanting to do. Then sometimes you work it backwards. Who's going to make the most sense for the story? What's going to make the most sense in terms of your goal? Because this is my goal for this story. I want it to be about this. So how do I step back and build those blocks to create that?
Awesome. I hope that was helpful for you. If you want to join me on Zoom for a live session like this, become a member of Kidlit Academy. We host 2 live events on Zoom every single month that involve industry experts that are either agents, editors, or successful authors. Plus, we do a Q&A just like this. You can get on Zoom with me or one of our industry experts to get direct answers to your questions. If that sounds exciting to you, I'd love to see you in the program. Go to journeytokidlit.com/Kidlit Academy so you can learn more. All right. Well, if you liked today's episode, let me know. Leave a comment below, hit subscribe, like the video, and then go and learn more and click this video so you can go further within your writing journey. Remember, story by story, change unfolds. Your idea deserves a place on a child's bookshelf. It's my job to help you write it well enough. And then together, we're going to create kinder, more empathetic communities that's just going to make an impact in children's literature. I'll see you the next video. If you've enjoyed today's episode, hit the like button and subscribe for more children's book writing tips every week. Remember, story by story, change unfolds. Together, we're going to be creating books that fill children's bookshelves and make an impact in our communities around the world.